Greetings, customizers, and welcome to the next adventure in Talking Hands Customs. What we're going to be discussing in this series is making a G.I. Joe toy cartoon accurate. The first question we have to ask ourselves is, what does that mean? Well, if you've noticed or not, sometimes G.I. Joe vehicles in the cartoon look different than the toys that we got. So what we're going to do is change the color of those toys to match the cartoon. Do we have to change anything else? Well, that all depends on how far you want to go. If we were to make something truly cartoon accurate, we would have to maybe color in some panel lines with black and make it look like it was drawn and etc. So we have to pick what we want cartoon accurate to mean. So in this case, I'm going to take it to mean the color of the vehicle. I'm not going to change the shape of anything, but I may or may not omit or change certain details. You can take this as far as you want to go. It's your custom, just like with everything else, the choices are in fact yours. So in this case, with the fire bat, I'm going to draw your attention to a few drawings right here. If you see this first picture, it's a picture of a fire bat on some kind of card. I don't know what it is. It might have been the vehicle card or from the comic books or something. Either way, you can see that it's a red fire bat with gray engine covers on the fuselage. Minimal changes, and the cockpit seat looks to be blue or something like that. So that's one way you could do it to make it quote-unquote cartoon or comic book accurate. The next picture here shows a brilliant red fire bat with a red Cobra emblem with a black background on it. And then on the wing, as you can see there, is a white Cobra symbol. That is also visually very striking. However, red fire bats are pretty commonplace in the toy world, so I'm going to draw your attention to the next photo and check this out. It's a gray fire bat with a nice, big, juicy red Cobra emblem on it. I like this one, and that's the one that we're going to do together. The reason why I like this is it reminds me of things like the missile from Cobra Missile Command. It reminds me of the snake armor. It reminds me of the Cobra Claw and the Trouble Bubble. And I love the way those look. There's something to be said about that light white gray color and that nice brilliant red Cobra emblem that just screams Cobra to me. So that's the picture that we're going to go with. That's going to be our reference. Now, there is one other alteration that happens in one of the episodes when Cobra Commander goes to attack what he thinks are some G.I. Joe or Allied American boats or whatever, and they turn out to be plywood decoys. There, the fire bat is also gray, but it's a darker gray-blue color, and the only Cobra emblem you see is a small one on the bottom. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to combine those two, which will help us further detail the cartoon accuracy. Because the thing being is that, coming back to our live shot here, the stickers or the markings on cartoon drawn vehicles tend to be minimal. And that is almost in line with the minimalist style. So in this case, we're going to decide whether or not we want to add the extra warning labels and the hazard labels and the arrows and the panel removal labels to this vehicle or not. And that's where it comes into the definition of what we're calling cartoon accurate. Sometimes cartoon accurate could look screen perfect, but it's bland. It's missing something. So as we go along, I will absolutely be doing the big red Cobra emblems on the tail fins here, but I may not put on all the warning stencils that come with the toy and make it cartoon accurate or vice versa. That's a decision that we can defer till later. We've settled on the color. In this case, it's going to be a very, very, very light gray. But we have something to worry about even before that. So for a modern vehicle, first off with this fire bat, when I first bought it off of eBay and I got it, I dropped it. It dropped this much, but one of the tail fins cracked in like 3 places. So I've already done the rough gluing back together. And then in trying to disassemble it, parts broke. This was surprisingly brittle, and I did a Sky Sweeper jet in Sky Patrol colors, and I had 0 problems disassembling and reassembling it multiple times. This is the first time I've taken this particular one apart, and things were breaking left, right, and center. So bad news is we've got some extra work. The good news is you get to see me do it, and I have most of the parts, if not all of them, to fix it. So we may have lost some functionality. Only time will tell whether or not I have, and then I'll have to make the decision about what I'm going to do to fix it. If you have a toy that needs to be fixed, it's a decision you'll have to make whether you paint it first, then fix it, or fix it first, then paint it. that may sound weird, but that's just because you don't know where or how it broke yet, and you don't know which way will be easier. So I want you to keep an open mind with the understanding that maybe it's better to do the whole custom first and then put this piece back in and paint it separately. Like I said, a bunch of you might be saying, that doesn't make any sense. I've been on projects where it absolutely makes sense. So just tuck that in the back of your noodle for later. The next thing being is that when we look at this is a modern fire bat. And if you remember what I told you about modern vehicles, they tend to have more details on them. In this case, one of those sets of details will actually get in the way of our stickers. And it's these rivets here. So I have a vintage fire bat somewhere, but I don't know if these details are on it or not. And the modern vehicles tend to do more with rivets and that style of detailing than their vintage counterparts, which makes stickering a bit of a pain in the butt. The prime example being the modern Skyhawk or Ghost Hawk, whatever you want to call it, has rivets everywhere, and it actually ruins the side fin for sticker purposes. So in this case, we'll have to remove those. It's your choice whether you want to or not. So if you're following along with this exact vehicle, you may want to follow me to the letter or not. If you're using another vehicle, that's something you'll have to keep in mind is, do you remove the detail where you want to put a sticker? Do you remove all of it? And that's entirely up to you. As long as you're happy with the end result. And if you're not sure, then just wait. Remember we talked about deadlines previously. The only deadlines that you have are the ones you put on yourself. So in that case, we'll have to do that. The other thing being is that during this cycle of damage, we'll have to actually putty some things and sand some things flush too, because this type of damage, regardless of how well you may have glued it, will absolutely show up through your paintwork. So we want that to disappear as best we can. And that'll include some extra work. The next thing being is that if I want to put a Cobra emblem where it should go on this, or anywhere on this for this matter, I'll be covering over a lot of these details, and I don't want to do that. But what is there is this serial number. And I don't need that there. I like these grill details and these greeblies here. This number serves zero purpose. I leave on stuff like the 2006 Hasbro stuff because it's a toy and it looks cool, but this serial number does nothing. It does absolutely nothing. So I will be sanding that down. And that's something you may need to take into consideration when you're doing your project. The other thing being is, how accurate do we go with this? You have to decide. So in the Firebat's case, it does have the same ordnance that the toy has on these inner pylons here, but there's actually more outer pylons on the outer wing when in the cartoon version than there is on the toy version. So you have to ask yourself, do I want to make it that cartoon accurate? In which case, you've got some scratch building ahead of you, which you shouldn't shy away from now that we've done basic scratch building. It's the same skill set, but maybe a little bit more advanced. Maybe a little bit. It depends on what you want to do, and there's more than one answer for that. The next thing is, what if the cartoon cockpit looks different? And in this case, it does. So do we rebuild an entire cockpit? You absolutely can, and you can do it with the skills we talked about in the Dreadnought tutorial. It doesn't have to be more advanced than that. What makes it advanced is the number of parts you put into it. So you could build a whole new cockpit if you wanted to, or even add to the existing cockpit, and that's a choice that we'll have to make as well. What else happened to this? There was a bunch that happened to this. It's a small vehicle, but there are so many considerations for this project that it may shock you. The other thing to keep in mind is that in that picture of the gray Firebat that we're going to do, this canopy is blue. This canopy is absolutely blue. So we're going to tint it, and we're going to tint it using clear colors. Now, the trick with clear colors is they do well coming out of an airbrush. But if you are brush painting, you have to be much more careful because the brush will deposit the paint unevenly, and you want to keep it so that you don't have any streaks whatsoever. And that is a bit of an effort to do. The second consideration is, do you tint the inside or the outside? The reason being is that even if you don't play with this when you're done, which is weird because I play with all of my customs when I'm done with them, but do what you want. If I tint the outside of this and I ding it off something, even maybe my fingernail, will there be a chip in there? And if I repair that chip, will you still see the outline of it when I repaint it? So right now I'm leaning towards painting the inside of the cockpit with the clear blue color. That will change the way it looks. You will see that when you paint the inside of something, the light interacts with this piece differently. All that's to say is that the blue color won't be on the outside, so it may look like somebody quite purposefully tinted the inside of the plastic. That's an aesthetic decision that you'll have to make, and we'll see it in effect during this project. After all that's said and done, the question is further modification. With the cockpit here, as with every version of the Firebat I've ever seen, unless there's some exclusive somewhere, there's no peg for the figure, and there's no joystick to hold on to, so the figure sits loosely inside the project. And we talked about paint transfer, so depending on what you're going to do with this custom afterwards, you may find that we want to add a seat peg for this cockpit so your figure can sit inside of it, whether you're using a modern figure or a vintage figure. In comparing the bats side by side, I saw a minimal, if any, difference between the molds. So in this case, do you want to dress up the cockpit itself, aside from scratch building all the panels on the side to match the cartoon drawing? And those are some of the considerations we have to take into account. So, for example, I mentioned the panel lines. That's what these are here, these lines that go through everything. Do you want to put a black, what's called a wash in those to highlight them all? That's something that happens often in the model building world. And how cartoon accurate do you want to get? So in this case, bottom line, I'm going to make this thing a very light white gray, and I'm going to put the big red Cobra symbols on the tail because those look fantastic. To support that, I've got to remove some detail and potentially add some somewhere else. The other thing is that with the Firebat toy, it has two slots down here for belly or chin guns, depending on your perspective. But when you watch the cartoon, it doesn't have these at all. Even in the G.I. Joe the movie intro, it doesn't have them. The cartoon where it was gray didn't have them, but they were certainly shooting their lasers. But that's the other thing, is that do you want to scratch build something that blends into the fuselage like on real aircraft, or do you want to scratch build if you don't have both of these or any of them for that matter, or do you want to just leave them off? Do you want to leave them off and maybe even not even cover these holes and just say, yeah, for cartoon accuracy's sake, there it is, and when I want to, I'll plug the two belly cannons on? How accurate to the cartoon do you want to go? And in this case, if you're picking your reference, sometimes it might be a screenshot and that's it. You'll pause the episode on the vehicle you want to replicate, and you might not be able to see all of it either, regardless of how many times you watch it. So you might have to infer what the rest of the scheme looks like, in which case, like with anything, right? It's art, do what you want with it. But I guess what I would say to that is, don't be afraid to be creative either and deviate from it. You could say cartoon inspired, whatever. The name of the style that you paint this thing in does not have to be concrete. You can change the name of it as many times as you want. It doesn't matter. What matters is you putting your effort in and you being happy with it at the end. And like we said, the happiness is the measure of success. Doesn't matter what anybody else says. So, with this unwanted broken Firebat, we will now turn it into a cartoon accurate or Sunbow Firebat. That's what I was calling, is that cartoon accurate is a lot to say, especially only on 45 coffees. So one fellow Joe fans called it, hey, why don't you just call it Sunbow? Sunbow colors. And I was like, that's fantastic. So if I don't say cartoon accurate, I'm saying Sunbow. If it comes from the other cartoon from Deke, which is horrible, then I don't know if you want to call it Deke colors. That doesn't really roll off the tongue the way Sunbow does, but it is what it is, and it's your choice. Try not to laugh too hard at that. So first things first, we need to repair this. So let's begin. I have some plastic fragments here, which belong to various parts, and I tried to match them up as best I could. I mean, look at that stress mark, and all I did was remove the canopy. This completely busted off, and I didn't even know it was happening. And then they got that stress mark was there when I popped off the little black cover that goes on over top. So this might even take more than one try to repair it. So if I repair it and then paint it and put it back together, those same parts may come apart or something else might happen, and I'll have to paint after I repair anyway. The end goal is to have it back looking like a Firebat, so whatever I need to do that is what we're going to do. And I'm absolutely prepared for this to take more than one try to repair it. So in order to do this, we're going to talk about a couple of glues here. There's two different kinds, well, there's many kinds of glue, but different glues have different viscosities, and that's how much they flow, if they're like a gel or if they're like water. This is the Plastic Magic glue I've used on previous projects. It is very much like water, and it works well for a lot of plastic. However, it is model glue, and the bond may not be the best for this situation. This is super glue. Stevens International, there's a bunch of companies that make this stuff. It's got red or blue or green or purple stuff, or purple labels on it, and it's Instacure. And this is cyanoacrylate, which is super glue, and this is super thin. So it's super thin, and on the bottle there you can see it dries in 1 to 3 seconds. This is water. So I'll show you. See the fluid in there? This is water. You have to be very careful in its application. If you put a little drop down, it will run everywhere you don't want it to. So you have to be careful. If you're careful with it, it's an outstanding tool. Why? Because you can hold two pieces of something butted up against each other, carefully apply this along the seam just a little bit, and capillary action will draw it around and dry it super quick. So it definitely has its applications. With a lot of super glues and a lot of other glues, depending on what you're doing, it may mar the plastic. So if your version of Cartoon Accurate is to leave this unpainted, I would try this on something that you don't care about first before committing it to plastic. And by crazing the plastic, basically what it'll do is it'll turn it foggy, or it'll turn it white, or some other god-awful color that you don't want it to be. And then you'll have to match this cartoon or this color as best you can to try and hide that fact. So super careful. In this case, we'll be priming and painting, so I'm not too worried about it. I don't want to be sloppy though, because those runs will dry and then I'll have to waste time sanding them down to fix the error. So now it's time to put my money where my mouth is, right? Just like every video. People are watching and people are judging. I'm just kidding. And man, I can't say this enough for all you customizers out there, okay? From personal experience, this is supposed to be fun. So if you're not having fun, stop, take a breath, walk away, come back later. This is a hobby and it's supposed to be fun. And if you make mistakes, as long as you're learning from them, that's awesome. So now, I am going to very carefully just put some on either side of this and it will be sorted and good to go. We may have to do some sanding, which is fine. And I'm holding this, I'm just slowly raising it up to the horizontal, and I'm not even really putting much pressure on the bottle itself, just enough, because once one drop comes out, it'll be more than enough. It's right at the tip, and there it is. That's all it takes. It's also good to have some Q-tips on hand to wipe up the excess, because in this case, because the amount you're putting on is so fine, and these surfaces, it was a nice clean break, there's not many places for the glue to go. Same thing again. Whoa. I'm doing it left-handed. There we go. Just run it over top, and now I'm just wiping that with the... You want to do the Q-tip wipe right away, because one, this stuff dries in 1 to 3 seconds, and you don't want that drip to get away from you. Okay, so there it is there, super thin, super glue. And not all super glues like this are super thin, right? You can get different viscosities, different thicknesses for whatever it is you want to use them for. So let's hold this up here. I'll have to do a little bit of cleanup, but as you can see, we're good. We are absolutely good. And a little bit of cleanup is to be expected every time, right? Whether you're masking, you're gluing, you're sanding, cleanup is part of the process, and we gotta respect the process. So that's that part done. And while it's dried, we're not gonna touch it for a bit, just to let it fully cure. The cure time will depend on the glue you're using, but again, no rush. I am super excited about this project, so I gotta force myself not to rush. So this part came off of this wing. And I'm fortunate in that these parts kind of broke off the way they did. I mean, obviously not breaking is the thing, but there we go. Not breaking is the key, but if they do break, at least I got some relatively large pieces to work with. if you got something that shatters into a bajillion fragments, the best course of action is to try and rebuild as much of it as you can, and then reconstruct the rest if you need to with something like styrene or putty to get it back, because there's no way you'll be able to glue, dozens of small broken off pieces. Now in this case, I'm going to push my luck here in that I can't hold these two pieces where they need to be and then put glue on it, because my hands just don't work that way. Because the pressure where maybe not so, yeah, it's 95% solution. The other thing you can do is put this on, and I'll take it off there. The other thing you can do is put this on the edge and then hold the other piece to it and let it cure there. But just remember that this stuff runs very, very freely. Oh, there we go. Oh, maybe. So I'm just going to touch it to there. And if right now I can feel my fingers slipping, if that's the case, just stop. Stop and readjust. Don't force it, because you're going to screw it up. You'll make more work for yourself. There we go. And you can see there, I don't know if you saw that in the shine there, but it ran through all the panel lines there, excuse me. And that's called capillary action. So because this stuff is so much like water, it started carrying along all these lines up here. Not a problem though. We can deal with that. And there's the wing repaired. So now we're just going to set that off to the side as well. And thankfully it's the other wing that broke, so I can do them both at the same time. Again, not breaking is ideal. So in this case, I'm going to show you the other way of doing this. So now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put this super glue on the part that's going to receive the broken piece, like that. And I can wipe off some excess. And then I'm going to position this piece back to where it belongs. Just like that. I'm just going to hold it a bit, put some pressure in there. Fantastic. And there we go. So again, I'm not going to, see, so I want you to see this. See how it's a little bit, pardon the focus. It's a little bit extra shiny down there because some of it ran down there, which is normal for this stuff. It's nothing I need to concern myself with. Worst case, I'll just sand it down a bit. Now, if you haven't heard before, you can use super glue to fill some gaps and seams and stuff like that on your projects. The thing being is that you have to keep a close eye on it because super glue dries super hard. Overall, it's more brittle, but the joint you get or the attachment you get using super glue is super hard. To the point where if you needed to sand it down because it was standing proud of the surface you were filling, you might as well use a stick of TNT because that stuff's going to be hard as heck. So once it quickly dries, that's when you start sanding it, not when it cures. So just a pro tip for that. And there we have everything we need to repair repaired. There was one other piece that broke off in here. It took me a while to figure out where that little shrapnel piece came from. But since then, that piece of shrapnel has disappeared. So it's part of the groove that holds the engine in place. And that stays in place just fine on its own. So we're just going to call that a loss. Besides, no one's ever going to look in there anyway. If it wasn't, and you needed to fill that, well, that's just another job for your sheet styrene, right? You should have some left over from the scratch building tutorial. And that's a repair you can make no problem. So now, for this episode, we'll call it done. I'm going to let all of this stuff cure, and in the next episode, we'll carry on with work with refining the plastic and fixing up all of the damage, and we will look at the next phase. So, in the meantime, I hope all your projects are going very well. If you're following along, stay tuned. And to all my subscribers, thank you very much. And if you're just joining us, please like and subscribe. So until next time, be safe and have fun.